What if the best, or what if one of the best maps to direct one to the area near the infinitely adjacent? What if the best or one of the best? I give you both. The latter, I guess, for those of you of a more genteel persuasion who might care to have your morning cornflakes, sans sugar, and amphetamines and just have it plain, or maybe with warm beer, you could consider the question, what if one of? But notice I said, what if the best? I said that first. Or one of the maps that might direct one to the area of the infinitely adjacent were or was humor. If we had more time just to palaver and prattle, jaw, I could even point this out, the possibility of life using this at the ordinary level. That is why some of the things we were already talking about the last couple of tapings, about how widespread humor is, how it cannot be analyzed, how I was suggesting to you it almost fits into whatever the definition would be of a dual singularity of humor along with sex, that even though they may disclaim it, once they start, they can almost, that is, ordinary intellects in the city, almost dissect, analyze everything from poetry to subatomic physics to how in the world that Sinatra's voice lasted so long. They can almost do anything except apparently put their analytic, explanatory hands on sex and humor. Both of them evaporate. What can you say after you say, hey, lay down? Or after you say, that was no lady, that was my wife. Somebody says, that's a joke, but it's kind of hostile, and I'm doing my master's on the hostility inherent in certain feminine-directed humor. Okay, go ahead. And then go ahead, and then it all seems to go away. So we could, I suggest to you, spend some time pointing out the possibility that life is letting other information, even at the ordinary level, seep out through humor. But I wanted to see if we could not consider it from a more revolutionist, subversive, radical, fresh, out of the ordinary vista, and even suggest to you the possibility that what people have imagined to be a new way of thinking, a new level of consciousness, what would seem to have been at one time the hoped-for payoff of religions, insofar as someone going through some kind of, not just the moment of epiphany, that's the way it actually became thing specific, but if it was really operating, it would have to be processional. It would have to be a continuing process of enlightenment, understanding, education, simply new ways of thinking. And so what if, even at that more specialized level, what if it were possible that the best or one of the best maps available, even in that specialized area, if it exists? Many people imagine it does. Let's pretend it do perhaps exist. What if within that area, if it did exist, and if you could find it, that the best possible, or one of the best possible maps available, might be in humor? That leaves immediately, might we suggest, the question of why there are no humorous religions, humorous philosophies, humorous political theories, economic theories. They're all, now you've got to admit, as with everything else in the secondary world, anything the secondary mind can think about, that's why you've got the difference, the categories between nouns and adjectives. Once you've got things specific, you can't just have one thing specific, it's got to become thing specific. And we'll assume that perhaps even life, or even your own human nervous system, gets tired of having to make up all new categories, and so once you've got X number of categories, then you can subdivide the species into subspecies just by having adjectives. That you've got X amount of categories here, and then you start doing, well, all right, they all seem to be the same, except this is red, and this is green, and this is yellow, that's wet, that's dry, that's tall, that's fat. So all of the political systems, all of the economic theories, all the structures, all the way from capitalism to Marxism, all the religions from Islam to Christianity, all of the economic theories to the free market, to the controlled economy, to forced planned production, and all the variations in between. You would think that the human mind would have thought of every possible combination, not whether, we're not discussing now whether they had any lasting historical impact, but at least they would have been thought of. They would have been presented, somebody would have written a book about it, made some speeches, and some group would have went, well, that's worth considering, except humorous. And don't just immediately dismiss it out of hand and say, well, you couldn't have a funny religion, now that you put it that way. And I say, why not? Assuming that I'm not now addressing just ordinary run-of-the-mill city intellects, because city intellects, of course, immediately dismiss anything that what? Doesn't make any sense. Okay. Except I propose to you that the question makes all sorts of sense. Why can there not be a humorous religion? And if that seems too sticky, if you have not yet had your cornflakes, why couldn't there be something less inflammatory, perhaps, to some people's thinking? A philosophy, something good, cold, cut, and dried, sans any kind of emotion, much less any kind of religious aura. How come you could not have some philosophy in life? Why was there not a humorous Aristotle somewhere along the way? A John Locke with a sense of humor, if we're going to push the apparent envelope of oxymoronicism. Or why not a political system? Why are they all deadly serious? Why can there not be a religion that was humorous? Now, I refer you back just at least for 1 second to what could be a worthwhile consideration that we were not pursuing right now, that even at the ordinary level, that is, the way life lets out new information. At another level, if you're getting that good, the way life itself begins to learn stuff, and then it finally seeps down to us, let us say, just to make a quaint picturization. That life even lets this information that reaches us, like life sees something on its own. This is real crude and it means nothing. It's just entertainment. But let us say that at some other manifold level, that life sees something new. Life has learned something new and it chuckles over it. Then over some period of what we like to laughingly refer to as time, it seeps down to our level and it comes down first as humor, like and like we're getting the reverb from that. And at first it just seems like, well, it's kind of funny. And then some other length of time, hours, years, decades, who knows, suddenly it becomes, gradually suddenly, it becomes part of the general human intelligence. But what if it started off that it seeped in, that it found its way in humor? Would that give you any way to even use the operations of the three-dimensional intellect, good old paleo thinking, to see that if that were true, then it would be, based upon some of the observations we have collectively made, regarding the nature of the human nervous system, that it might be, well, that if that be true, that new information is coming out in the intellect, what is one of the things that, based upon some of the other things that I've tried to sketch out, that life might do? That is, immediately deny it had any significance, as always. Punch and Judy, perhaps Punch says something of astounding potential significance. I won't even try to make it up because I do not have the philosophical wherewithal of a hand puppet. But it says something, and then Judy goes, ha ha ha. And what if it did actually have some astounding significance, and then Judy went, wait a minute, that's not just funny. Wait a minute. And then Punch comes over and gives her a slap. Or begins to put the make on her. Or says, it was just a joke. Jesus, forget it. Can't you take a joke? In other words, life let information out. Perhaps in this consideration here, this example in humor, but in other ways that I've tried to lead us into considering when life seems to do that at the ordinary level, what is one of the things it does? It denies its importance. In various ways. It doesn't have to do it directly. But it completely covers up. It makes first stories, and then everybody forgets about it. And if anybody wants to push it, like, wait a minute, they're just a person here and there acting in an untoward, anomalous, free-for-all, riding off into the sunset with birds under their intellectual saddle, and life just kind of dismisses it. They become a voice in the wilderness. Or somebody, if they were that, if it was beginning to spread, it's like then life will even take the time to say, wait a minute, that's insane. That's your imagination. How much of history is taken up? Even that appears to be academic, cold-blooded history is taken up with people looking back over what appears to be the written records and spending some of the time of their presentation of history, but denying some of what other people consider to be history by dismissing it as being imagination, as being spurious, as being ill-founded. It could not have happened. Why does life operate that way? Why does life let these stories out? How much of history? Start reading, just pick up a history of the Western world. And let's say they start very shortly after an introductory, somewhere in the golden age of Greece. And they will spend some amount of time trying to deny, at least in their way, bring up to date, to deny certain stories. That there probably was no Troy. It certainly was no long siege of Troy on the basis of these tales from Homer. They spend time denying that such and such happened. Now get past history, get past the words. What is life up to? How did these stories get out? Now, of course, an ordinary person would say, well, wait a minute. Even I got that much intelligence. I remember reading something about that. It was this guy Homer. He was trying to make a living. It was before the printed word, and he was out there, trying to stay out of the chain gang out there in the Grecian times, and he was one-legged or one-eyed or whatever it was, and so he became a traveling troubadour, making up stories, and he would just keep doing it, and he would, as a good entertainer, and he would catch on to the audience, and they began to like this story, and he kept expanding it, and it turned into this whole thing about the siege of Troy, fighting over the one woman, and the more he told it, they liked it, he kept adding to it, and then it became, although it was spurious to start with, it fell into almost a folklore, and it became, after a certain period of time, history went by, and people couldn't remember whether it was true or not. That makes enough sense for anybody in the city, right? When you get past the idea that people here and there just simply begin to make up stuff and that they are ex parte on their own, feeding in new information, new energy into the DNA of life, once you get past that point, then you understand that life put this out, or at least turned its head and let it happen. Again, for those of you that haven't had your morning breakfast, at least it let it happen. So to say, well, wait a minute, humans somewhere ran amok, and we've got all kinds of spurious, if not specious, history that must be straightened out, or else we'll never have a clear view of where we've been, and of course, so we'll know where we're going, etc., to make Whitehead and the rest of them happy. But how did it start anyway? Why is it out there? But notice, then it eats up. It transfers energy again of people having to deny, people trying to straighten up, trying to separate the wheat from the chaff, the history from the fable, the minerals from the guys. But why? I refer you back to the possibility that I was trying to get you to see with humor, that if it were, that was a parallel example, at least I thought it was, but I'm easily fooled. If life was letting information come out with humor, what is one of the things it would do? It would be the same as if too many people take it seriously, then you'd have other information beginning to come out. Nowadays, probably psychologists. There could be all sorts of areas, but we begin to say that kind of information that started out that you people are laughing at here in our society a few years back, and that now we notice there's some college students or people here and there are pockets of people that seem to be taking this seriously. I must tell you that the person that said that, or the group that was putting out that information, do you recall Homer and some of the tales that he spun, and that for a while, in fact for thousands of years off and on, were taken seriously, and it's pretty darn well proven by now archaeologically that if there was a place Troy, there was no prolonged siege of Troy on the basis of the stories. So do you see what's happened? You people have fallen for some other myth that for some reason now has begun to take hold, and certain groups of people are taking it seriously. And so even if it didn't stop it, all you've got to do is have that kind of serious denial. And again, you know that life is alive and well. That life says, Punch says 2 and 2 is 4, and Judy laughs. And he says 2 and 2 is 5. Seagull says, that's getting metaphysical. He says, you can't take a joke. But then later, hours later, days later, in that same act, same Punch and Judy, she may, just out of clear blue sky, years later, say, I still think that the idea that 2 and 2 is 5 had some kind of symbolic message. He said, are you still thinking about that? You don't see? Well, what if humor, let me ask it to you another way, what if humor could be used as a kind of OD weapon, of an offensive and a defensive weapon? We're not talking about the ordinary, remember. What if somebody who was attempting to establish some new encampment inside their own brain from which to look at things? Humor could be, I suggest to you, an offensive and defensive weapon to use against things becoming too thing specific. How about one example? I'll call it good, but I guess that'll be up to you to decide. It is an example that, if you can see it, touches everything that everyone does. What if you could use humor? What if you saw that there was a use? Of course, when I say humor, you've got to remember from the last few tapings, I am talking about that which would be non-thing specific. It's something other than ordinary humor for the time being. It's sans aggression. It is non-thing specific. But what if you could use humor against a certain aspect of the way life is tied together that has to do with the old life-induced serious memories? Specifically, the holding of grudges. It's a pretty general term, but surely in a second you can see that that is a part and parcel of what would seem to be the basis of an ordinary person's sense of themselves. It is quite proper, it is absolutely necessary for the continuity of the secondary world. The full continuity, you've got to be holding grudges. Or if you want the simple way again for a second, you've got to have memory. Ordinary, serious memory. Not frivolous memory, if there was such a thing. Not silly memory, but by God, serious memory. Because that's what serious people remember. That's why good serious people cannot remember a joke. Don't ever tell a doctor or an accountant a joke. Not only will they not laugh, but they'll say, well, wait a minute, I should tell my patients more jokes. I'll remember that. Don't any accountants or doctors or comedians write me. Memories with ordinary people are serious memories. The whole aspect is serious. And from one widespread view, not unjustified whatsoever, is to refer to all memory as the holding of grudges. It is right at the basis of there being a continuity of the secondary world. Well, you can surely see there would be no secondary world. There'd be no civilized world. There'd be no social world. There would be no society whatsoever without memory. So to use our kind of artificial, arbitrary maps one more time, if we were cut back to being simply primary creatures, only limited to keeping body and kin alive and reproducing the race, there would be no need for memory. And you can turn it the other way. It's true backwards and forwards. But you have got to have memory, or you would not have civilization. You've got to have memory, or no one would understand that they cut down a plant and some of the seeds, the shells fell out, and it grew back. Or that one time they were sitting there poking around with their toe and spitting in the ground and dropped in a piece of corn, and it grew there. And it grew, and they ate it and forgot about it. They could not remember to go back. Or they went around the corner from their cave and they found this water hole. When they were real thirsty, and they drank. Then they went back home. The next day they got real thirsty. Next day after that they got more and more thirsty, and they finally died of dehydration because they did not remember that there's water around there. It's a literal truth. Memory is the same thing from one view as a secondary world. But then you can see, I was trying to bring you up to some kind of speed, you can then see that all memory, in effect, is a kind of aggression. That the basis of civilized memory are grudges, account books. Of course, there's something I'll point out to you. If you ever let them know that you're keeping account books, they'll find you wherever you go. You can quote me on that. You can depend on that. If they know you're keeping books, they'll always find you. underline always, if you want to write, they will always find you because you can't hide. There is a real sense, I wasn't going to stop here for long, but that all memory, of course not every little piece, we know that because there are things you remember. You remember where you left, where you hid the bottle. You were afraid your friends at the party was going to drink up everything you had, and you had a nice expensive bottle of ouzo or something, and you hid it. And the next week, we'll assume that you can remember it, and that's not real holding a grudge, if you want to put it that way. Or you remember where you laid down your billfold each night so you can get in the morning, or your car keys. But when it comes to the kind of intellectual glue of memory that is holding society together, there's a way in which you can see that it is all aggressive. It is all account books. It is all a kind of holding of grudges, politically, economically, socially. If that's not real clear, I'm going to try to push us on a few more minutes here if you will just remember that. But if that were true, even if you don't get a glimpse of it, if that were a correct observation verbally, then you at least have to admit, for the sake of, forgive me, logic and reason, that humor would have to interfere with it. Of course, if you don't see that that was the state of things to start with, then me hoping that you would see that the latter part might be of some benefit, I guess, fits into the category of being fulsomely charitable to myself, wishful thinking. Ask yourself this then, what might be possible if in some way you could interfere, let's put it another way, if you could just interfere with the natural process of the intellect creating your own secondary world by making all processes, as it should, by making all processes into things specific. What if in some way, rather than talk about a whole new way of thinking, what if you could just start interfering with that in some way? Also, well, consider it this way before we push on if you need to. What if you looked at things specific as being local reality and the universal being processional, being the non-interrupted flow of processes, but then everyone's local reality, not yours, not mine, not somebody with more education or less education, but that everyone's local reality, everyone's subjective reality, just reality. It's not a negative, it's not a pejorative attack on ordinary intelligence, but everyone's reality in some way is local. And all local reality is thing specific. That's not a theory. There are no definitions about things being thing specific. There is no intellectual activity at the ordinary level without things being thing specific. They cannot be processional. The world did not exist until the great gods said what? The Word. They had to say the Word. They had all these processes according to all the stories of creation all over this planet, that all this stuff was going on. Of course, they've already interfered with it by these writers saying there's all this stuff going on. But anyway, they're trying to convey without them knowing it. They're trying to send this message that all this stuff is going on. Whatever it is in Genesis, that it was just all kind of mucky and chaotic and just darkness and then light and then waves and then ebbs and flows and just smoke and, you know, like a heavy metal concert or something. And you expected Whitesnake to come out, and instead it was God, which I guess made a lot of kids want their money back. But at any rate, it was all this, and it said it was all faceless and without form. Isn't that it? Something like that. There was just kind of creation was just kind of there, but it, you know, it wasn't really our kind of creation until the gods said the word, you know, whatever it was. You know, let there be, you know, get your act together. You know, let there be creation as people will know it later. He had to say the word, or she. But notice, that is, the processes had to be made thing specific. What if there was some way to profitably interfere, profitably? We're talking about just individuals here and there, not any kind of widespread something going on in life, because it would be a new form of chaos. But what if there were a way that you could profitably interfere with this mechanical activity of the intellect continually creating each person's local reality collectively the secondary world, the world of man, as opposed to the non-speaking, mute, primary activities of man sans intellect. The secondary world is made by this, taking processes and turning them into things specific. And what if in some way you could get in there, I call it interfere, alter it, play with it? Would you consider that if there were a way to do that, that the way might be humor? Not ordinary humor, I'd say it again, but some kind of humor. Whereas at city level, when people think about such as this, again, back to the old ideas of secret knowledge, secret information, being more intelligent, being more conscious, all of that brings in, even by city definitions, comparably speaking, always brings in the concept, the idea, the notion of heavy-duty seriousness. You know, that is, somebody, let us say, could be a Catholic and be Catholic serious, whatever that is. But then in some way they get overcome with the desire to be mystical, to rise above just the level of an ordinary Catholic. Then let's say that that was serious, to try and be religious in any sense, in any church. But to try and go further, you got to pull yourself together, take certain vows, even dress up funnier than you were before. But the thing is, you have got to get industrially strength serious. But notice what we're discussing. What if, from three-dimensional views, you could call that diametrically opposed to another distinct possibility? That is, of get less serious. And of course, the ordinary world would hear that and say, hey, get serious. You know, because that's ridiculous. If you're going to pursue anything, if you're going to pursue that, especially outside that would seem to be the movable state of the external world of politics and economics, etc., trying to improve the quality of a man's spirit, his soul, his mind, we are talking serious business. They always have been, still are. It's not open to question, is it? Well, that wasn't until I opened the question. I don't know who's going to hear it. But notice, nowhere on this planet, no area in history has there been suggested that, wait a minute, if you're going to try to go any further, I mean, here you are living in Muncie, Indiana, wanting to be in touch with the cosmic forces, and so you're going to save your money and travel to Kathmandu, because maybe they've moved it from Tibet now. The secret information is there. Right? And you go, yes. Is there anything funny about that? Well, not hardly. Look at the sacrifices. Or just immediately, you're going to have to give up your home, you're going to have to give up your job you're doing, save your money, work on a tramp steamer, walk there. But plus, if you get there, it's serious to start trying to find, well, who's got the information now? Where's the secret book? All of that, I'm just using that as an extreme example, all of that from people just attempting to improve themselves, to try and become more humane, trying to become in some way more in touch with their humanity, trying to become more in touch with the civilized influences that should be more the cradle of us all. There is no question. I mean, from one area of this world to the other, from one race, one religion, one language to another, it does not vary. That is, on the basis of saying, well, wait a minute. Now, you people here in this area, you're trying to appease the frog gods, and you believe that by praying to them a certain way, you're about staying up 3 days, and by putting 2 frogs in your jockey shorts and staying up another 3 days, that in some way it'll put you in touch, and you'll go into trances. And they go, yes. All right, all the way from that to what might appear to be that we're up in, Norway, and we're finding people out at, do they have Lutheran monasteries? We'll assume they do. Way up, getting up close to the Arctic Circle or beyond, living there by themselves, only in their underwear, and praying constantly. That would seem to be, and maybe reading the Gospels over and over in their original Greek and Armenian and all that. So you would seem to have a wide spread there, all the way from people who seem to be pretty primitive in their attempt to expand their thoughts, their views of life, to that which would appear to be more in line with the Western tradition of pursuing Christianity, the study of the Scriptures, trying to get in touch with the gods or Jesus or Jehovah. So you got the widespread. But is there any difference between the two insofar as, well, wait a minute, one of these is serious and one is not? No. They're both dead serious. Dead serious. Of course, then the other question, some of you who can see, is they have had this going on. Life has let this go on as long as you've got recorded history. You've had them playing with mystics here in the Western world as far back as you've got Homer writing. Has it had, in any way that you know about, any way that your nervous system can respond, has it paid off? No. Well, if you think otherwise, then of course you can turn over to the next chapter. That is the next channel, or leave. But it has not. And you should be able to feel it in you. It's not a mistake. It's not because the people haven't done it correctly. It's not because of anything. It's because that's the way it's supposed to be. And again, notice the beautiful symmetry, especially in 5 dimensions, which is not symmetrical to the 3-dimensional mind, but trust me, the symmetry of life instilling in everyone, all the way from the best minds of this village that are trying to get in touch with their frog consciousness, the most intelligent, most enlightened. And there is some genetic basis for it. But the shaman here running this, it could be the son of a son of a son of a son of a shaman. And to these people, apparently involved with this kind of intellectual mysticism in more civilized, externally speaking, areas. Both of them have no payoff. Vis-a-vis Punch saying, well, here's what we should do. We all want to be more like this. And Judas says, yes, I do. And Punch says, well, somebody gave me a message, and it said we should do this. We should worship frogs, or we should study the scriptures, whatever he says. And she says, wow, that's what I've been waiting to hear. And he's been saying this, or vice versa. He's been saying this that we know of by history for, let's say, 6,000 years. And for 6,000 years, she's been going, wow, that is heavy duty. And where did it pay off? As far as the individuals of Punch or Judy? Nowhere. And you should be able to feel it. But notice that life does not even let anyone question what seems to be the basis of the attempt. The question is, well, we're not strong enough. We didn't do it right. And nobody questions the process itself, which is no longer a process. It is now thing specific. Well, if you're going to do something, you have got to become a reformed frogitarian. Either that, or we've got to return to orthodoxy Christianity. In other words, the way to pursue this process of trying to be more intelligent or more enlightened is by becoming something thing specific. That wasn't hard. You've got, all right, take an easy example. You've got to become a real Christian. How about that? Or a real Jew. You've got to do that. That is the only course. And of course, all religions say they're exclusive to Christianity. That the only way to the kingdom of heaven, the kingdom of God, something new, is through the church. That's it. It's not opening a question. I'm sorry, that's it. In other words, the process of becoming more enlightened, more godlike, more intelligent. This process can only be accomplished by becoming something thing specific. That is a good Christian. And so then if you were to ask civilization, ask your own nervous system, does this work? And the answer is, never has. And if you ask your own nervous system, well, what seems to be the problem here? Well, we're just not up to it. That is, none of us can become, obviously, a real, well, I guess it would be without quotations, excusez-moi, for us to become a real Christian. That's the problem. We cannot become this thing specific. That's the problem. But notice, there is no widespread interest, curiosity. The question does not arise on a large level that, wait a minute, let's stay with Christianity for a second. That, yes, I want to become more, I want to understand what's going on, and I buy into it. I was born here in it. The story is, to do that, there's only one way, and that's through the church, through being a Christian, okay? And I have grunted, I've sweated, I've done everything they said. Not only didn't happen with me, I now strongly suspect it hasn't happened for anybody. Now, many people's been through that. Life lets that happen. But then, there is no widespread interest. No one offers the possibility, and it's spread of, well, wait a minute. Maybe the fault, dear Brutus, is not with us or the stars. It's by the apparent process. It never arises. Oh, come on. It's like life. Let's say that everyone was born in Muncie. And it's like then everybody wants to get out of Muncie. Don't write me from Indiana. Let's say that everybody not only wants to get out of Muncie, they want to end up in Alberta. And it turns out that no one can get to Alberta. No Christians, Jews, Muslims, Buddhists, Hindus, Zoroastrians, even Koanans and Elks. Nobody can get to Alberta. And everybody accepts the blame. Well, we're just not up to it. I don't know. We're just too weak to do it. We're too dumb to do it. We just do not have the moral wherewithal to get to Alberta. What if it finds out that there is no Alberta? Or that you shouldn't be in Alberta? Or that based upon the way things are now, where you think Alberta is in the opposite direction? That even if you got there, you'd go, boy, what a disappointment. The same thing we're talking about, I thought perhaps a little crudeness might be in order. Of course, it's hard to imagine where crudeness is not ever in order. What if through this kind of process, through a kind of humor, that you could take back neo-connect. That wasn't too extemporaneous. I thought of that a few minutes before I did it, but I wanted to make the point. Because you could say, what if in some way we could reconnect back closer to the primal flow? Instead of just our intellect being run by the secondary world and us recreating it as we're supposed to, what if in some way we could reconnect to the primary world? See, that's what my little dramatics there about. What if we could neo-connect? But see, ordinary people would take the reconnect. Because you're back to the fall from grace. You're back to, we're all here in Muncie, but by God, if we don't get out of here, the gods are going to get us. We all belong in Alberta. That is, that we have got to, in some way, go to the past to find the future. That in some way we have lost our way. And that I could have said, well, wait, what if anybody ordinary was following this far, and that they took it as being something metaphorical for a religious idea that I'm just fixing to spring sooner or later, and said, well, what if we could reconnect to the primary world? There are many people, if they just followed this metaphorically for a few minutes, they'd go, now you're getting to the heart of it, right? That's like, well, hey, let's all go back to Mother Church. Let's all become Christians. Let's all convert and become Jews if they'll have us. Let's all become Buddhists. If they don't make me shave my head any closer or something. The idea that we have got to redo something, which is a return. Then people go, I knew that. But what if it's not neo? It's some kind of new connection, because returning, if it was possible, to a primary life would not get you anywhere. Because you could give that a shot now. You could give it if you want the feel of it. It's just abandon everything. Now, I mean everything. Do not take your Walkman and don't take anything. Just dump it all and go out, sell everything and get you a plane ticket up to, way beyond Alberta. Or going up into Lapland, or out in parts of Alaska if you want to stay part of the great U.S. of A. And just walk until you just get away from everybody. And don't take anything. In other words, if you really tried to become a hermit, you would be, in a sense, closer to being reconnected to the primary world. But if you imagine that would do you any good insofar as opening up your eyes to new views, then you should be a hermit. Because it's not. And yet, taking it metaphorically, even taking it literally, people, all the way from religious ideas to social theories, immediately take to someone, apparently taking the soapbox and saying, what we've got to do is which means return, which means we've gone astray, we have got to find our way, and it's somewhere right where we left. And it's behind us, because nobody wants to hear it's ahead of us. Because ordinary intellect, the only thing it knows for sure is ahead of you is, But it would not be a reconnection, it would be a neo-connection. And there's no way to really describe it, because we're already describing something that was prior. We're sticking the neo on top of the paleo, putting a new connection to an old world. It is three-dimensionally, topographically impossible, but it is certainly not a reconnection to the primary world, because it is still being here and being alive, we'll assume. It's not up to us to decide what you want to do, but we'll assume it's not taking yourself physically into the world of the hermit. But what if in some way you could connect anew somewhere that was not just back at the old primary level of trying to turn yourself in to an illiterate, silent, isolated hermit, which is a hobby, but it's not going to do you any good, or to stay here and say, well, in some way I'm going to work out my destiny by pursuing some religion, by working real hard, by going into analysis. They're all hobbies, there's nothing wrong with that, but it's not going to change. It is not going to move your nervous system into some new area here. So it would have to be, I suggest at least pictorially, a new connection. But the new connection would be closer. Remember, this is not true, I'm just saying it. Would be closer to saying a new connection to the primary world than it would to say it's just some elaboration on the secondary world. Even the gesture didn't help a lot, did it? All right, maybe both hands do it. Doesn't help, does it? Well, you could ask yourself one further dirty question, at least rhetorically. If you could, like, find some kind of new connection that would be closer to the primary world than it is simply an elaboration of the secondary world, comma, if you could find some way to perhaps that there was some form of humor that would almost usefully alter, interfere, give you a chance to put your hands on the flow of the secondary world here, in which processes at the universal level, as they must, become things specific at the local level. If you could do something like that, I was going to ask to at least close out this paragraph, amongst other things, to ask yourself, what might this do to your concept of you? What might it do to the older, primary circuits, conceptions of doom and gloom? All right. As buoyed as we all are by our roaring success thus far, let's try something else connected with this. Could any of you see that in the three-dimensional world, and they even consider without any doubt that there are 4 dimensions in this world, including time, but could any of you see now on the basis of what we've been talking about, could you see that time is not really so much a dimension in any sense as it is simply another means of making primary processes into things specific? As some public speakers I've seen in my life seem in the past want to do, I always wanted to say this. Well, if you get nothing else from this meeting, if you could just leave with that one thought in mind. What was it I just said? Well, anyway, with that thought in mind, consider that time. Now, it makes sense, Cartesianly, all sorts of ways, that time is obviously a dimension. There's no way that you can, or the most specific way to identify, to locate somebody, something in the three-dimensional world is to have the 4 dimensions, not only of where they are spatially, but where are they time-wise. That's the only way you can find yourself if you're out sailing on the oceans, or if you're attempting to meet a blind date at such and such place at such and such time. But now consider further, forget all that stuff. It's true enough, but people in kindergarten know that. Yeah, they do. I was trying to think if all of us knew that already until I said it. Anyway, kids know that. Can you see that time, very specifically, in the way in which we're talking about it now, is still one more way, and I'm talking about a heck of a way. A real good way, I would say, if life needs our regards, of taking processes and making them into things specific. Or if you would like a parenthetical hint before we go any further, what if you couldn't do it without time, without a sense of time? Hope I didn't let the cat out of the cat. Can you see that time, and I might add parenthetically, besides sex and laughter, by considering how tenuous, if not vacuous, it is for the human intellect to try and analyze it. All those two areas. What would be the third one? Again, forget how Sinatra's voice lasted this long, or how Vic Damone pulled the wool over our eyes for all those years. What might be the third area? I would suggest to you time. And we could come up with other things, but surely you'll follow just that time seems so real. You don't have to be a philosopher, just time. It just seems to run your life, or it has as much impact almost as anything. Just time. And yet somebody tried to analyze it, and well, it's not just my little watch running. It's something. It's real. We just can't describe it. They can try and describe it mathematically. They can try and describe what it might be theoretically. And yet it seems real enough, the same way as sex and laughter. But to actually describe what it is, to analyze it. So what if it, again, is one of the bases, one of the foundations of the secondary world, of thought? That without time, without what man thinks of as time, there would be no way that the universal could be made local. There'd be no way that the processes, the non-ending processes of life, could be turned into things specific. You've got to have time. There's no way to freeze, to stabilize, to identify things unless they're set into what men call time. And I don't mean just to identify and say, well, all right, I will meet you at such and such corner, and you identify it spatially, such and such city, Friday the 17th at 3:15 p.m. Not just that, but you have got to stabilize. You have got to be able to identify, even in here, that is your own thoughts, by using time. Even if you don't think about, well, I'm going to think a certain thought at 3:15. Without what men call time, you could not stabilize the things that the human intellect are taking that were originally processes and making them things specific. They would not stabilize. It'd be like trying to stop the bakery, the process, and say, all right, I want a piece of pie. I want to sample it. And then you stop the bakery, and you slice off a piece of pie, and you can't get your hands on it. It's like it is running in and out of different dimensions. All right, we'll make it crude. It's like the pie takes on, the slice takes on a life of its own, and you look like some kind of Warner Brothers cartoon of you chasing the pie around, and you can't ever grab it. As soon as you get close, it just... That would be what it was like if it were not for time. That stabilizes the processes that have been turned into things specific, but they have got to exist in time, or you can't handle them. They will not stabilize. All right. History. Follow this right quick. I'll try to make it from metaphor to something realer, more personal, as quick as possible. But if people, just ordinary people, for whatever reasons, but I can think of two or three. Let's take Napoleon again. Brought him up. When was Napoleon washed up? Now, are you going to say, well, it was, if you're going to say that, it was in, June of 1815. Waterloo, that's it. All right, now, this according to what energies life needs. Now, if we were talking about schoolyard descriptions, to where we were actually limited to the words, it would have to be, let's say we're talking to three historians or three students of history. It'd be according to what kind of paper they'd just written. It'd be according to what agenda they had. That somebody could say, if I said, when was Napoleon washed up? When was it over? When are we going to say, hey, Napoleon, baby, give it up. You're done for. And somebody would say, well, that ain't that. We're talking about Waterloo. And much of history would support that there's statues, there's songs. Don't make me sing them. They're little dances. There are all kinds of, that Napoleon, he realized, hey, I've met my Waterloo. All right? Which is a kind of an anachronistic joke that I don't go into. That's like somebody rushing in 1914 hollering, thank God World War I's over, but never mind. At any rate, much of life would support the fact to say that Napoleon was washed up in 1815. But, now we turn right around with somebody else. Now, we're not talking about people. I'm just using these as an example. We're talking about life's energy. And you can turn right around to someone else and say, well, he was really washed up when he had to retreat from Moscow. That was it. And somebody can say, well, I know that Waterloo, came on, but we're talking about 1812. He knew it. Now, I'm speaking for some historian. he could say, in some parts of history, some parts of the human body, inside of life's body, if they were listening to all this, would say, you know, you're right, I never thought about it that way. But if we said, we're talking about September. We're talking about 1812, when Napoleon said, hey guys, you know, we might as well leave. You know, let's turn around and go back. You know, let's get out of Moscow. All right, people could say, now that's it. Now he lasted another couple of 2.5 years. Now I understand that before Waterloo, but it was, you understand, it was like the fat lady had already come out to sing. Maybe you didn't stay into the final note, but you knew the opera was over. This show is over. This guy is history. All right, you could say that. There's another part. But you could also say this. We could take some else. And you say, well, yeah, I can hear you saying that. I'm speaking again for the third party now. So I can hear you saying that, and I can hear you say Waterloo. But look at it another way. Let's get more specific. I could say it was June. Several months. It was June of 1812. It's when Napoleon was over, not when he retreated from Moscow. It was when he said, we're going into Russia. It was then. That's when he was over. I mean, so this guy could be saying, I'm refining it for you. Don't waste several months of them tromping all the way to Moscow just to get there and realize, boy, was this a mistake. The man should have known. He should have known. He had no business trying to march those people in over land, which, you know, back then they didn't have troop trains and all that stuff. He had no business. The man was completely out of it. It was over the day that he said, whatever it was, in summer of 1812. He turned, he said, all right, I've decided, and he folded up his maps, Moscow. Got there and get them, that's it. And he walked out, went to bed. You could say that was it, but do you follow? It has to be in some way. It's not that one of them's right or wrong. It'd be according to whatever at the ordinary level would seem to be the particular interest that somebody had for supporting one or the other. They can make up another one. They could say it was over for him the first time that he realized, boy, these headaches are getting bad. And his brother-in-law, who went to a mail-order med school, he said, you know what, I think you've had syphilis, and I think it's hit your brain about 2 or 3 years ago. And Napoleon went, uh-oh. You know, if we knew that for a fact, then somebody could say, it was over back then. The rest of this was just, you know, that was 2 or 3 imaginary fat ladies coming out to sing. The opera was over once it turned into cephaloparesis. Once the stuff got up here, yeah, it was over with anybody. More specific. Did you follow any of that? Take it more specific. You have got to do at the ordinary level your own intelligence, your own thinking. You have got to do that. Everyone does with your own life. That is your memory. That is the account books of you. There has to be the time that cuts up the process of your life that makes it appear to be a thing specific that you have actually lived. Instead of using the retreat from Moscow or one's Waterloo. All right. How about divorce? If it was an ordinary person and you ask them, what is one of the big things in your life? Maybe they're already talking about they're still bitching about the alimony they're paying or something. Or their life's never been the same. That they have never been their drinking's become even worse since their unhappy divorce. And you said, and to them, that was a pivotal point. That if you ask, and you say, well, I guess you seem to be taking this pretty hard. Yeah, I am. Well, is it recent divorce? Well, no, as a matter of fact, we got divorced. It's been nearly 3 years ago. Well, you must have really been into the relationship. Yeah, I was. I was just shocked by it. I thought I had, psychologically, I thought I was pretty strong. I've never had any real problems. But I'm going to tell you what, I was shocked. I have been, I hate to say devastated maybe, but my life has not been the same. And so you ask, well, when was the pivotal point? Now, this one person, I could take the 3 examples of Napoleon, he could say, well, or she, well, it was the day I got divorced. I mean, I can still remember it. I don't have to go back and look. The day that my attorney called me, it was April the 16th, 1979. He said, well, it was finalized today. You're now a free man. It's all over. Don't forget the alimony. He could say that. Or he could be another part, and he said, well, it was actually in January of that year, as I came home one night, and my wife was not there, and she left a note that she'd gone over to visit her cousin, and I don't normally do such things, but I had something important to tell her, so I called over there, and before she could think, her cousin said, Well, I hadn't seen her in months. And I just knew. I mean, it wasn't the same. I didn't actually see her do anything, blah, blah, blah. He could say that, and he could say, that was the point. I still remember the day. I can still tell you the day, and I even know about what time I called. Not thinking I was excited, I said, hey, let me speak to Marge. And her cousin went, well, Marge is not here. And I can still remember, I was standing in the kitchen, and I can still remember, it was 6:15. And it was like the cold hand of death almost grabbed my little heart. And I knew something was wrong. Or you could say, well, when is the pivotal point? When was your marriage over, if it wasn't one of those two? You could say, well, it was the day. For months after that, she seemed all right. I didn't find there was nothing else unusual happened. And then one day, out of a clear blue sky at work, I got a call. And I answered the phone. I knew who it was, and a man's voice asked me, who it was, and I said, yeah. And it was an attorney, and he said, I have been retained by your wife, and we're suing you for divorce. And he might say, I can still remember, I looked at the clock then. I remember the day. Do you understand? It has got to be cut somewhere. This is not an attack on history. This is not anything, but there would be no history. You surely understand that. Come on, we're out of time. You got to understand. If things were not made, if the process of life, just take the process of life, has no beginning and end. If the process of life were still processional and had not been made things specific, do you hear it? There would be no history. And you said, on what day did such and such happen? The answer would be, no time. It never happened. It hadn't quit happening. You have got to holler, wait, close down the plant, hold up everything. You got to shut the bakery down for a second. Like, everybody stop right where you are so we can cut up the pie and see what it is. There would be no dates without history. And you can say, well, that's obvious. No. There would be no dates without time. Well, yeah, that's obvious. No. There'd be no time unless the processes of life were being stopped by this, taken from the primary level, nonverbal level, and turned into the secondary world, wherein the processes must be made thing specific. There would be no sense of you unless your life was cut up into a history. There would be no you at the ordinary level unless what? Well, unless stuff had happened to me. Right. And what's the big stuff that happened? Well, I can name them. My divorce, when my mother died, when I wrecked that car that I stayed up. Everything is thing specific. That's the only way you know you're alive. If it was not thing specific, we're out of time. I can't give you any more threats. But do you see? Well, that is no threats. You would have no conception of being alive. You could not use the raw information, if you want to call it that, although it wouldn't be information at that level, but the raw information of life as a non-ending process going in all possible directions. If that was the only conception you had of you and life, you couldn't talk about it. You would have no feeling that there was an internal state of you and then the external movable state. There would be no I plus not I. There would be no I and then the rest of you. There would be nothing to talk about. You'd have no history. You'd have no account books. There would be no way that you could identify who you were. You would not exist in the secondary world. And of course that would be true for everyone. There would be no secondary world. And we would all still be, God knows what, amoebas, unicorns. And looking at some of you, I don't even want to think about it. Back in that primeval slime, some of us could have still, before he rolls out to begin to evolve, some of us could have still been rabbis or accountants or policemen. It boggles a gentle mind to think about it. So let's know.